A lot of people tend to think that mental illness and mental health issues are a relatively new thing, which is simply not the case. Many people in the medieval age, and possibly long before that, suffered from mental illnesses. From medieval knights and soldiers coming back home with PTSD to average men suffering from anxiety or depression. Mental health issues were far from non-existent, and in this video, I'm going to be covering the most mentally ill English king in the nation's long history, Henry VI. Henry was born on the 6th of December 1421, and soon became England's youngest ever monarch when he was crowned king on the 6th of November 1429, aged just 7. This was followed by yet another coronation 3 years later, when he officially became the King of France on the 16th of December 1431, shortly after his 10th birthday. In saying this though, he never had any real power over his kingdoms until his 16th birthday, when the powers that be in England decided he was ready to fully assume his royal duties. Following this, Henry, who was by nature shy, pious, and averse to deceit and bloodshed, immediately allowed his court to be dominated by a few noble favourites. Despite his shy and timid nature, the first real signs of mental illness in the so-called Boy King wouldn't appear until August 1453, when he experienced a full-on mental breakdown, possibly as a consequence of the news that his army had been routed in the decisive Battle of Castellon that marked the end of the 100 Years' War. He became completely unresponsive to everything that was going on around him for more than a year, and even failed to respond to the birth of his son Edward. It is possible that Henry may have inherited a psychiatric condition from his maternal grandfather, Charles VI of France, who was affected by intermittent periods of insanity during the last 30 years of his life. During Henry's bout of insanity, the Duke of York was named regent as the protector of the realm in 1454. The Queen, his wife, was excluded completely, and Edmund Beaufort, one of York's rivals, was detained in the Tower of London. At the same time, many of York's supporters spread rumours that Edward was not the king's son, but Beaufort's. Other than that drama, York's months as regent were mostly spent tackling the problem of government overspending. Around Christmas Day, 1454, King Henry finally regained his senses. This left nobles who had grown in power during this bout of insanity displeased. Most importantly, the Earls of Warwick and Salisbury, who decided to take matters into their own hands. They backed the claims of the rival House of York, which, if you remember, the protector of the realm during Henry's bout of insanity was a part of, first to control of the government and then to the throne itself from 1460, pointing to York's better descent from the previous king Edward III. This, unsurprisingly, raised tensions between the already rival houses of Lancaster, which Henry was a part of, and York, which, despite a few meek attempts from Henry, eventually erupted into the full-scale war, now known as the Wars of the Roses, at least partially due to Henry's weak and ineffective rule. The two families' forces first engaged at the Battle of Northampton on the 10th of July, 1460, where the king was captured and taken into captivity under the Yorkists. His wife and son managed to flee the country through Wales and Scotland, however, where they found refuge in the court of the Queen Regent of Scotland, Mary of Guelders. Here, she quickly set about eliciting support for her husband from that kingdom. She managed to find substantial support relatively quickly, and re-entered England at the end of the year, where they engaged with the Duke of York at the Battle of Wakefield, on the 30th of December 1460, which resulted in a resounding victory for the Queen's forces and the death of the Duke of York. A few weeks later, on the 17th of February 1461, the Queen's forces engaged with the Earl of Warwick, under whose custody the imprisoned king was being held. The Queen achieved yet another victory and managed to liberate the king, who was, unsurprisingly, not in the greatest mental state, supposedly laughing and singing as the battle raged around him. Unfortunately for them, though, these victories were short-lived, as within 6 weeks the king and queen's forces were once more defeated at the Battle of Towton on the 29th of March 1461, with this time the entire family, including the king, managing to evade capture and fleeing into Scotland once more. Over the next few years, the family attempted to gather support, this time on the mainland, to little avail. After their Queen Mother's death in 1463, Scotland actively sued for peace with England and exiled the king, who passed back across the border to try his fortune with those nobles in the north of England and Wales who were still loyal to his cause. Following yet another defeat in the Battle of Hexham on the 15th of May, 1464, Henry was now a fugitive in his own lands, but continued to find safety in various Lancastrian houses across the north of England, until, while staying at the home of Sir Richard Tempest, he was betrayed by a Black Monk of Addington. On the 13th of July, 1464, a party of Yorkish men, including Sir Richard's brother, John, entered the house to arrest the king, who fled into nearby woods, but was soon captured and held captive in the Tower of London. Thanks to his wife's tireless efforts, Henry was actually briefly restored to the throne on the 3rd of October 1470. Unluckily for him and his wife, though, his return to the throne would only last 6 months after the Lancastrian defeats at the battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury. Following these defeats, Henry was imprisoned yet again, and when the royal party arrived in London, he was reported dead. Official chronicles and documents state the deposed king died on the night of the 21st of May, 1471. In all likelihood, his opponents had only kept him alive up to that point, as to not leave the Lancastrians with a more formidable leader in Henry's son Edward, who had been killed shortly before this at the Battle of Tewkesbury. Once the last of the most prominent Lancastrian supporters had been either killed or exiled, it became clear that Henry would be a burden on the Yorkish king's reign. The common fear was the possibility of another noble using the mentally unstable king to further their own agenda. According to an official chronicle favourable to the new Yorkist king, Edward IV, Henry died of melancholia, a condition characterised by depressed mood, bodily complaints, and sometimes hallucinations and delusions upon hearing the news of the Battle of Tewkesbury and his son's death. Modern historians generally agree, however, that Edward, who was recrowned the morning following Henry's death, had ordered his murder, a view which is backed by the remains of the king that were exhumed in 1910. Henry was found to be 5'9", or 175 centimeters tall, with light hair, and was also found covered in blood and with damage to the skull, strongly suggesting that the king had indeed died by violence. Now, throughout this story, it is clear that the king suffered from mental health issues. As to what he actually suffered from, most modern historians tend to think he suffered from a form of catonic schizophrenia, which may have been passed on to him via his maternal grandfather. Well, I think that's where I'm going to end this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. But, as always, with all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one.